Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Light After Trauma podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Scolari, and I am sitting here today with the wonderful Robert Strock. Robert is a psychotherapist, teacher, and humanitarian. He's also the author of a book that we are going to talk about today called Awareness That Heals, an expression of the powerful tools that Robert has developed over a lifetime of inspired exploration. He has hundreds of online videos, blogs, and guided meditations, which I tried, by the way, and are fantastic. That he has shared with therapists, psychology students, social workers, caregivers, and seekers of their own inspiration. In addition to this, 20 years ago, Robert co-founded the Global Bridge Foundation, whose mission it is to continue on the creation of a more compassionate, just, and peaceful world that honors the dignity of all beings. This foundation is a part of a united effort to support systems for global change and economic inequality. Most recently, he has 2 podcasts that are coming out. So as if he wasn't busy enough, now he is coming out in, you said April, right, Robert?
Yes.
So in April, he has 2 podcasts coming out, one that is based off of the book Awareness That Heals. And then one is, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the one that's tied to the Global Bridge Foundation, right?
That's correct. It's really tied into homelessness, regenerative agriculture, and immigration reform.
Okay. All right. So welcome. How did I do with that bio?
That was pretty good on the fly.
I did do that on the fly. So thank you. Thank you. Well, welcome.
Great to be here. And thanks for inviting me.
Yes. So for the listeners out there, Robert and I connected on LinkedIn. And we had a conversation back in January of 2021, so this year, about his book. And he was kind enough to send me a copy of his book, Awareness That Heals. And it took me some time to get through it. It's an incredible book. And I really wanted to have him on the show. Even just after my first conversation with him, it's very easy to tell how passionate he is and how much knowledge he has on healing, especially knowing his personal story. So I wanted to bring him on the show today to talk about this book because he really has developed tools that I think are helpful for everybody, especially going through difficult times, and as I was just saying before we started recording, right when I got this book was when I started to go through a lot of health issues and a lot of health scares. And reading this book truly helped me to be able to ground myself during times when I felt so anxious and so worried about my health. So thank you so much, Robert, for sending me this incredible book.
Well, you're very welcome. And thank you for being willing to share yourself personally, which is such a gift to the audience to have someone that is leading the way by sharing their own process, which is one of my pet peeves is just, we're all human. And if we could just learn to be able to, with those that we trust, to be able to share what our inner experience is, and then guide ourselves or be guided to how we can best take care of ourselves.
Yeah. So could you talk a little bit more about, what it is that you do? So are you still, because you have so many things on your plate, are you still practicing psychotherapy, or did you become a therapist and then kind of launch into all these other different branches?
Well, all the branches are really connected to the same tree. The foundation and my therapy work, which is still happening, is very connected because the last 35 years, I've exclusively been seeing leaders in fields that are successful, but they know they haven't arrived. And they feel an emptiness, they feel an incompleteness. They know that they followed the program of life that was taught to them, and they won, they succeeded. But yet somehow it didn't touch their heart or their being or something inside. So they wanted to really understand, well, what am I missing? And so that has really been the narrow referral base that I've had for the last 35 years. And I've been counseling for close to 50 years.
Wow. So you have, it's a very specific niche of people who have made it essentially, but still feel this type of like hollowness inside.
Right. And to make it even more confusing, almost all of my clients are running foundations and are doing good work with people. They may be at the beginning stages of it, or they may still be scared, or they may have communication issues. They may have issues with their foundation. They may have issues with their family, but they're good souls. And there are select groups. I'm very, very fortunate to not have the monetary need so that I can really not have my discretion of clients be people in a random sort of way, because really, from my vantage point, the interconnectedness of all the things that I'm doing and trying to do is that the world itself is endangered with global warming and all the other aspects of the political chaos and the corruption and terrorism and nuclear dangers. And so somehow all of us doing what we can to have a different understanding of what mental health is, which means, to me, how are we relating to the world? And are we doing our best to be a quality person that is caring for others and caring about the world, caring about the earth? And normally in psychology, a traditional therapist is trying to have you adjust to the world or have a stronger ego. I would say my work largely is focused on having a stronger relationship to the world, a stronger relationship to your heart, and also a stronger relationship to what is really challenging, where your own suffering is. And so that you can be aware of that and then let that guide you to asking the question of how can I best take care of myself? And then a number of other strands. But basically the tree is we're all interconnected. And the more we can see that, the more it has a tendency to open our heart and guide us to where we're not connected to ourselves, to each other, to the partner that we're with, to a family member, and facing the hard to face things like what you're talking about, where you have a health issue, and obviously that's terrifying. It's scary. It's frightening. It's anxiety provoking. And sometimes it's 10 times that.
Yeah.
And to have the courage to A, admit that, and then B, while you're allowing that to be the way it is, not trying to magically make it go away, but guiding yourself to know and to follow, how can I best take care of myself? What are the qualities that I need to guide myself toward? Courage, perseverance, maybe diligence with going to the doctors that you need to see. What are the thoughts that I need to think? I know I want to care for myself right now. I know this is a very hard time for me, and it would be a hard time for anyone. So I want to be open to what I'm experiencing that's challenging, and I want to find the best way I can to guide myself to care for myself, but also care for others too. When you have a health crisis, sometimes you just need to be self-oriented, but
yes. Yes, which can be hard to do when you're a therapist. Absolutely. And so many of the themes, or so much of what you said, I see themes of what I read in your book, which is this concept of awareness that heals. And it's so vastly different from just general awareness. And, I know for you, well, I guess I should ask, is it all right if we dive into the book?
absolutely.
Can we dive right in? Okay, because I think this book is phenomenal. And I mean, a huge congratulations to you. Even the word. So I want to start with this word, heartectomy.
Yeah.
Okay. Heartectomy. You made that up, right?
Yes.
Like that is a Robert Strock. You should
Yes.
trademark that, because when I read that, right? So there's this part in this book where, well, Why don't you explain it? What is this concept of the heartectomy and how did you get to that spot?
Well, I had to pay the price. I was really fortunate enough that I had a need for a kidney transplant, and my brother gave me a kidney. And of course, that's normally the amazingly good news, which it was. But the bad news was that the medications that I took basically were received by my body as if I was taking speed. So I slept for an hour a night for 6 months. And then basically for the next 8 to 10 years, slept for about 3 or 4 hours a night. And so when that happened, I was so exhausted, so anxious, so agitated that I couldn't feel my heart. I couldn't feel all the qualities of peace or inspiration or joy or a degree of tenderness. All of those were like 97% gone. So I just referred to it as my heart was taken out, my inner heart. And with that, it led to a natural provoking of, well, if I'm not the good feelings that I was my prior 30 years, throughout my adult life, who am I? Who am I? How can I live a quality of life when my heart can't feel because I'm too exhausted? And I had never had a bad night's sleep in my life until the first night of the transplant. And so it was not a gray situation. It was a very black and white main line.
Yep. It was like, your world as you knew it, which you say in the book, drastically changed. It flipped a switch, a complete 180, where, for the first 30 years of your life, you were relatively ineffective and doing great things in the world. And then it was like, boom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sickness.
Yeah. So the inquiry, which, I had a lot of time, I had 23 hours a day now to be contemplating.
Right. Right.
I think the first thing that I really became aware of in the first month or two was in the middle of the night, because I was so exhausted, that my mind had nothing beneficial to tell me. And so I was just going to be quiet and kind of train myself. I had been meditating for 30 years, but I trained myself to really say, no, I'm not going to listen to this, because I knew it was going to come out of fear. Is this going to last forever? I can't stand this. I know those are the kinds of thoughts that would have been spawned. So I could feel the impulse as they started. I just went, nope, 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 nope. So then it became clear that my intelligence was still okay. My wish to heal was still there. I wish to be able to feel my heart. And so there was a combination of wisdom, intelligence, and will that were still intact. And so that became more my focus. As a matter of fact, it became overwhelmingly my focus, and still allowed me to be a therapist. And I still kept my practice. And the clients that had been with me for quite a while, they all knew I was getting a transplant. And so I would just say to them, listen, please, I'm in a state of exhaustion. I'm fine. I don't want to be the center of attention, but I don't want you to identify with my state, because I'll be a bit flatter, but I'm still able to fully be with you. In reality, my ability to feel their heart or their body was much more available to me than being able to feel my own. So I was able to kind of borrow their body almost and be able to feel where they were. And I knew my job was, as it had been and still is to empathize with whatever the person in front of me is going through, and then listen to their words and their ideas as to what's the very best way they can take care of themselves. And if I can mirror back, oh, so you're saying you're afraid because you're not healthy and you need to have the courage to go to the doctor, that's my job to mirror that back to you. It's not my job to judge you. It's not my job to make morals for you. And of course, what I'm saying is a very high functioning client. There are some people that have very serious issues that it's not just a matter of mirroring. It's a matter of medication. It's a matter of all kinds of other strategies. For my clientele, they're mainly looking for the guidance of the tagline of the book, which is bringing heart and wisdom to life's challenges, which is a very key part of awareness that heals, because you can't have an awareness that heals if you suppress your emotions.
Yes.
You need to really be open to both be aware and actually develop a caring for your emotions. And then that naturally can lead you to the qualities, the thoughts, and the actions that you need to embrace to care for yourself.
And these were principles that you came up with while you were healing, while you were going through the physical recovery, well, and emotional recovery.
They were doubled. They were principles that were already, let's say, 2/3 of them were already in my practice, but those all deepened. And then about a third brand new principles were developed because of the depth of suffering that I was in.
Yeah.
And if I used my old tools, they didn't work. For example, my old tool would have been share with friends, gee, I'm really unbelievably wasted today and exhausted. And the sharing would create some kind of relief and they're caring for me. Well, that did nothing for me because I was chemically altered. And so in a certain way, I think the important thing is virtually all of us are going to have a time in our life, if not many times in our life, where it might be hormones. It may have been there from birth. It may be a trauma. And it may be something that we need chemical support. And so we really need to honor the fact that these feeling states that we're in, if we don't embrace them and find a way to hold them, that they will run our lives if we let them stay unconscious. And so they need our caring, and we need to let them guide us to what we need. So I have a free part of my website lists 75 challenging emotions and 75 qualities and actions to help be more literate for anyone. Yeah, I know I'm not feeling good, but I can't quite tell what it is.
Yep.
And now I know what I feel, or a few feelings, or a constellation of feelings. And here's 75 ways that I could potentially help myself. Which ones of these do I really want to put my attention on? And making that connection is such an extraordinary link to connect the suffering specifically with the needs that you need to develop the discipline to focus your attention on, and summon up the courage to keep them together.
Yeah, I think that's so important, especially for kind of like you said, none of us get through this life unscathed. And I think that we all endure some type of trauma at one point. And I think when that happens, we can feel almost like our hearts have been ripped out of us. And in that moment, we don't have words. Sometimes when it comes to trauma, there are no words because our brain can't process it. And therefore we're like, well, I don't know what this feeling is. And if I don't know if I have no awareness of this feeling, what am I supposed to do about it?
Exactly. And, words like overwhelmed, or just exhausted, or just, I really feel bad.
Yes. Or upset. I get that word upset all the time when people come into my office. I'm just upset. And it's like, that's when we need your list, right? That's when we need the feelings chart of like, all right, let's go through this. What is it? Be more specific, which is very, very hard to do when you feel like your heart's been ripped out of you. Like who you are, fundamentally who you are has been altered.
Yeah. And it's very helpful because most of us say, I feel so-and-so. And really there's a sense that you believe you are what you feel. And when you realize, let's say when you're in a crisis, I would say not only when you're in a crisis, but really in ordinary life, a better definition of who you are is how you respond to how you feel. So really developing the ability to respond, first to identify how you feel, but also to develop the ability to have a resilient set of qualities and actions and thoughts that will guide you to be able to care for yourself. And it's rare that people stay aware of what they feel, let alone are aware of a whole bunch of different ways to care for themselves and others.
Yes. And then, so if you become aware of what you feel, some things that you talk about in the book that really hit home for me is like, well, how do I cultivate a friendly mind around this? Right? If I feel X, Y, and Z. So I know for me, when you describe that experience of like your whole world stopping or your whole world changing, back in 2018, my mom, it was May 5th. I had been married for a month and a half, and my mom got very, very, very sick very fast. It was like she was totally fine in the, prime of her life. And she was 59. And then boom, within a day, she was in the hospital with full blown sepsis. And I was sitting in the intensive care unit in a room with the doctors going, your mother is gravely ill. Your mother is gravely ill. And I'm like, what do you mean? I just got married like a minute ago. Like I was on my honeymoon. I came back. I was starting my life with my husband. And it was like, boom, like your mother's not going to make it. She did, but we were told many times that she wouldn't. So in reading this book, I come back to this a lot. And cultivating a friendly mind, I remember talking to my therapist during those moments and not being able to identify how I felt. I felt like a shell. I felt like who I was got up and left, and she was nowhere to be seen. So I couldn't identify how I felt, but what I did know is that I believed, right? Because there's a difference between thoughts and feelings. So I couldn't identify the feelings, but I did know that somehow it was my fault that she was dying.
Hmm.
And that's when this concept in your book of cultivating a friendly mind really hit me, and setting ourselves up for impossible standards as if I solely was responsible for the health of my mother and keeping her alive, right? Like,
Right.
I'm no doctor. So I guess, could you talk a little bit about that, like cultivating a friendly mind throughout this process?
Yeah. And I want to come back to the word solely. I doubt you were even partially responsible, let alone solely, but
Right.
coming back to that. So when I was in this state of really almost being inert, other than the aspects I've already talked about, I realized I did have my mind. And I realized that the mind usually is viewed as a booby prize, relative to the emotion and feeling good. But I also came to really quite a depth realization that if I could have my mind be friendly toward me in a way that I earn, it's not just a free lunch. A friendly mind is, well, okay, what am I really capable of? What's possible for me in the next hour? Now, if I'm doing what's possible for the next hour, that's realistically possible. Like sometimes it's lie down. That's my highest possibility. Sometimes it's take a walk. Sometimes it's put my hand on my heart. Sometimes it's call a friend. Sometimes it's go to a doctor. If you guide yourself to what's possible for you in the state you're in, and you build that up, that allows your mind to really trust you. So you develop a mind that can be saying, you know what, I really like that you rested when you needed to rest. I like when you worked out when you needed to work out. That the mind becomes your best friend when you are listening to yourself, and it's kind of a partner with how can I best take care of myself, and then listening to that sincere question that sounds intuitively obvious. Well, who wouldn't ask that question? How do I best take care of myself? Well, the answer is almost everybody. And so that's one of the facets of the capacities that we have, is to ask that inquiry. You have one chapter that's called Inquiry from the Heart. And that's really asking questions in a positive way. They're saying, what can I really do? And you mentioned impossible standards. Well, the standards don't take into consideration that you may, if you're 50 and you want to be younger than 50, well, that's an impossible standard. If you're not married and want to be married at that moment, that's an impossible standard. What can you do? Well, I could take good care of myself and my health when I'm 50. What I could do is make myself available. What I could do is grow and do my best to become a sensitive person to increase the chances of being in a good relationship. So friendly mind is really something that when you're really, particularly in a crisis, it's gold, because you can be nice to yourself and not be afraid to look. It can encourage you to keep staying in the next hour, the next minute, the next day at the most, maybe. Occasionally you have to plan a week or two ahead of time. But part of the friendly mind is staying with what's possible, doing the best you can to follow that guidance, and to keep being realistic about the potential. And after a while, you start to realize, wow, my friend is an ally, instead of it saying, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
You say things like, you know what, this would be difficult for anyone to be
Yes.
feeling what I'm feeling, to be going to a doctor and worried about X, Y, or Z. And this would be difficult for anyone. So how can you best take care of yourself now? Is this a time where you need to write a letter to somebody? Or is this, what's this hour about? And when you really start to take it sincerely, that the next hour, really even the next breath or the next thought, but you sort of start with wherever you are. Maybe you're living 4 years from now, and maybe you're living a year from now, but you're gradually coming closer and closer to the present and the next week, because that's possible. Realistically, what can I do? How can I be toward myself, toward others, in my next thought process, and in the way that, in my tone of voice? You know, how can I be the best me according to me? And even asking the question is a sign that you'll recognize you're on the right track, because you're caring. You're caring about yourself, and you're caring about those important to you. Sometimes it's, how can I best take care of myself? But when the self isn't suffering that much, it's, how can I best take care of the moment? How can I best take care of somebody else that I might not know that's in great need?
Right. Right. And I think that also helps, especially people who have endured extensive types of trauma, like, abuse, physical, sexual, emotional. We often have feelings of guilt and shame, right? Guilt, shame, almost always with any type of trauma. And I think that trying to do that, and trying to, as you say, cultivate a friendly mind, also will help tame those god awful feelings of guilt and shame, because they are crippling.
Yeah. And I think there's a paradox that's also very important, which is that the response to the shame and the guilt is what's really important, because it's really hard to get an eraser out and just erase the guilt and the shame. So early in my life, one of my teachers said something very wise that really I've remembered ever since that time, which is, don't feel ashamed for feeling ashamed. Don't feel guilty for feeling guilty. Don't be afraid of being frightened. So the alternative is, see the innocence in the guilt. For example, I feel guilty because I did something that I regret. And so the way you can deal with that is, okay, I feel guilty or I feel ashamed. I probably can't erase that. Is there anything I can do in addition to caring for myself while I feel ashamed? Is there anything required for me to heal that? Maybe I need to resolve a conversation with somebody and go back and redo it. Maybe I really was just a victim, and I realized that I need to just stand in myself and say, you know what? I was completely victimized for me to blame myself. is completely ridiculous. However, I'm still going to be victimized. These feelings are a sign of the remainder of the victimization, but I don't have to feed it because I can counter it with a friendly mind instead of a mind that's going to keep going, I'm ashamed, and God, yeah, maybe I was really flirting, or maybe I really did go into a dangerous area, or maybe I said, well, that wasn't your intention. That wasn't the case. And I'm sorry you have to go through the shame. And I'm here with you. And I am an empathic voice, and assuming that it's not completely overwhelming, I do care about you. And it's okay that you have feelings of shame. I know that sounds almost like a terrible thing to say, but it's a kindness. And trying to get over feelings is a futile endeavor. Trying to respond to feelings with warmth, the feelings will go away when they're ready to go away. But when you have a mind and a quality that's caring for you, that's the medicine. Trying to get rid of shame, trying to get rid of guilt, trying to get rid of anger, it's more like, okay, I'm angry. How can I best take care of myself when I'm angry? Well, what is it that I really need? If I'm angry, it means it's something I don't like that happened, or something I don't like that didn't happen. So is there anything I can do, any way I can speak, any way I can be, that's going to allow me to take care of that original need? And if the answer is yes, I want to go for it. If the answer is no, I want to come to some kind of acceptance, but I don't want to compound the injury.
I love that. What a phenomenal quote of, and I can't remember exactly what you said, but I think it's something like trying to get rid of feelings is like a futile endeavor.
Yes.
And I mean, the power behind that, because, right, we're not shaming ourselves for having shame. We're not guilting ourselves for having guilt. We're not beating ourselves up for being angry. It's like the more you try to get rid of the feelings, the worse the feelings become. Like, you can't stop the feelings. You can just console yourself through the feelings. You can, as you write about in the book, move from this place of self-rejection to self-compassion.
And I'm very careful about saying things like moving toward self-compassion, because just as you can't change feelings, I don't think any of us are ever going to arrive at a permanent state of self-compassion. So it's like, I want to move in that direction. I want to take my baby steps in this way. Maybe I can take a full girl or a full boy step in that direction. I don't want to get too demanding of myself. I want to move toward caring for myself. Oh, I'm being judgmental toward myself. I really don't want to continue that. I want to see that I'm doing that. And I want to do my best to respond each time with, are you actually going to be able to learn anything by judging yourself? Now, occasionally, the answer is yes. Like, for example, let's say you've abused your health. And you say, oh, you're such an idiot. You've been abusing your health. Well, you still don't want to be negative and judgmental, but you do want to face the fact that, you know what? I do need to eat a little bit better. I do need to work out a little bit more. I don't want to do it, but listen to the difference in tone. One is a tone where it's really punishing you. And the other one is a tone that's rooting for you.
Yes.
That's behind you. And it's looking at what you really can and can't do, what's really possible, what's impossible. And again, that's one of the questions that's really important to ask whenever there's any self-judgment of, is it really possible that I can do anything about this right now? And if so, can I gather the strength of character to face it and to make some steps toward it? And if you can't, or if you, more accurately, if you don't, the judgment is going to stay there. And you can try to stop it at the judgment, but the wound of not taking care of yourself is still going to be there. So the real thing is, oh, I see a wound, or I see a limitation, or I see a place where I'm not taking good care of myself. And the real I, as far as I'm concerned, is the one that wants to take care of ourselves and everyone else. It's the caregiver of ourselves and those around us. And the more we're with that, it might be at first ourselves, and then it might be ourselves and our partner and our friends, and then it might be our community. And it's kind of a gradual evolution toward caring about more and more people without that being another standard, like getting ahead of yourself. It's like it's so important to start with where you are and then to just be honest and aware of whatever it is that's most hurting or most causing the suffering. And then having that continuous question of how can I best realistically take care of myself, especially in the near future?
Yeah, absolutely. And all of that, for the listeners out there, I will absolutely link the book, The Awareness That Heals, on the show notes so that you can access it very easily. But Robert breaks down all of these themes into very specific sections of his book. And he also gives critical thinking questions to help you practice these different types of concepts. And they're very, very healing. And so my favorite part of the book is the one on anger. Transforming anger. Anger is something that comes into my office, and into my personal life as a disguise, typically in the form of high anxiety, people pleasing, depression, addiction, because we don't know how to deal with our anger. And for me, I developed, for the listeners out there, I know you all have heard me say this, but, I had battled an eating disorder for the first 25 years of my life. Yeah, because I've been in recovery for about 4 years or so. And all of that was to push down my anger. And as I continued to go to therapy, and then I started to have my repressed memories, because I had repressed memories of sexual abuse that came to the forefront. I became aware of them. I eventually just felt rage and had no concept of the word containment, which is one of, I think, the hardest things to do personally and one of the hardest things to help people with professionally. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I would say if anybody really is taken in by this is something that requires months, if not years, if not decades of practice. And so
1,000%.
I'm going to give it but the understanding version is definitely inadequate for practice, because this requires practice.
Months, years.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So depending upon which version I'm doing, there's like 7 or 8 steps in really transforming anger toward intimacy and peace. So the first step is being aware of anger, that, as you said very eloquently, that you had all kinds of side doors the way anger came out. So the awareness that, gee, I'm angry. Oh, I'm angry. Oh, good. I'm finally aware that I'm angry. And notice the good, that you don't say, oh, shit, I'm angry. What's my problem? And then that's kind of a cutoff switch. That's when it goes sideways. It's like, congratulate yourself that at least I'm aware of my anger. And then right behind that is you realize, you know what, this has caused me all kinds of hell in my life. So I want to make it better. I want to learn how to care for myself, which I call an intention to heal, or you could call it wanting to care for yourself, or you could call it wanting to care for everyone that's involved in this situation. Now, if it's somebody that has abused you from your past, that may not apply, and probably does not apply.
Right.
But in general, if it's not that situation, if it's a live current situation, it would be that. And then the third step, after being aware of your anger and then recognizing you want to care for yourself, is what I would call containment. And containment does not mean suppression. Containment means you're not acting it out, you're not suppressing it, but you're allowing yourself to fully experience the raw aliveness of anger in an environment, backyard, your car, a close friend, a therapist, And you're really allowing yourself to feel the aliveness of the energy with no holding back. If anything, you exaggerate it. So you can really support yourself, not to suppress it. And then the next two steps are kind of blended, which is, as you're doing that, you're asking yourself the question, what are the vulnerable feelings underneath this? And also, what is it I'm really needed that made me mad in the first place? And so that's step really 4 and 5. So, for example, when you look at the anger at any kind of abuse, there's obviously fear and there's grief, and you allow yourself to feel that as part of the containment period, where you're letting yourself feel the fear and the grief. And then when you say, well, what do I need? That's a complicated question if it's about abuse of the past. First need is going to be the need to not blame yourself.
Yes. Yes.
That's the need. And you, I've been blaming myself. It's not even so much the abuse as much as the self-torture. Maybe I did this, or maybe I did that, or maybe I was a little bit aroused, or maybe I was this, or maybe. It's like, no, the need is to not blame myself, is to accept myself, to accept the fact that I really was attacked unfairly, whether it's a verbal attack or a sexual attack or a physical attack, or if you're in a relationship and the anger is there, what is it I really needed? And what are the vulnerable feelings? Well, I feel hurt because my husband or my wife or my partner isn't communicating with me, or they're not warm in their tone of voice, or they're not empathic. They don't care about how my day is. That's what my need is. I want to feel connected. I want to feel like we can talk. I want to feel like they're interested in my day and my inner experience and who I am. So what if I learn how to communicate what it is that I need, rather than being angry that I didn't get what I need? That's where the pivoting, the major step is
that's the transformation.
That's the transformation. That's almost there. That's part of the 75 qualities where you say, communication is one of them. It may be a tone of voice that's a caring tone of voice. It may be a curiosity. It could be any one of 75 things, and more than 75. This list isn't meant to be like the list. It's just a list. It's a comprehensive list. Then after you discover what you need, how do I communicate the need? Let's assume it's a present circumstance. How do I communicate this need? In what tone of voice do I communicate this need? Because there's all kinds of possibilities and likelihoods that, I'm aware of what I need. And I'm going to say, I need to communicate. I need to communicate. How many times do I have to tell you that I need to communicate? No. That's just letting the anger sneak back in while you're aware of what you need. So the 6th step is communicating what you need with a tone of voice that's playable, that's reaching, that's sincere, that's earnest. And that's very important, because just expressing our needs while we're dumping, that isn't any better. It's a little bit better because it gives a chance that the other person might get it, but it's pretty unlikely if you're dumping on them, they're going to get it.
Yes, it's not very productive.
No, it's not very productive. It's a little bit better because you give them some information as to what was missing for you. So to be able to discover what you need and then express it in a tone of voice that's relational, that's caring, that's encouraging, that's not sabotaging, is the 6th step. And then the 7th step, which is a little bit of my, let's say, hopefully not just mine, is perseverance, is do it at least 3 to 5 times. Don't assume that your partner or your friend or your family member can get it the first time. Give it a few chances. And the only exception to that is if you're really with an abuser, if you realize you're only taking this step to try to communicate if you think there's a chance. If you're with a really abusive person,
yes,
then the 6th and the 7th step become acceptance that it's impossible to get that need met, but at least you know it. So now you need to work with accepting that inside yourself. You know what? My partner's not into communication. It's never going to be into communication. If I mention it one more time, they're going to smack me.
A very, very important discernment. Very important.
Yes. So in that 6th step, you're asking yourself, is there any realistic chance I could express my need and have even the wildest possibility, if I do it really well, that it may benefit the relationship? And if the answer is yes, then that's that way. If not, then it's working with yourself to say, okay, Is this so bad that I need to cut off the relationship?
Yeah.
Is this so bad that I need to boundary the relationship and just see them once every 3 months instead of once a week? Does this mean that we need to separate if we're in a relationship? Or is this just one aspect that I'm overreacting to? But when I look at the whole picture, it's still worthwhile.
Yeah.
And I just have to have the maturity to accept it inside myself and realize every relationship is going to have some weaknesses. Now, if it's something like being abused, that's very serious.
That's a deal breaker. Yep. That's a non-negotiable.
Right. Or, disloyalties or just severe dishonesty. Those kinds of things are playable. But if somebody is not good at communication, like my father was probably the most decent human being I knew in my whole childhood, but he was not a communicator. He didn't communicate his feelings. He just would put his hand on my shoulder, or my mother's shoulder, or my brother's shoulder, and give us a light hug, not the kind of hug we have these days. But he was a great man, but he was a non-communicator. So for him, I could say to him, I have the need to communicate. And he would just say something like, well, what do you want to communicate about? And it wouldn't matter what I said. It wasn't going to work, but it wasn't a deal breaker. So that discernment of whether it's really a deal breaker or a boundary setter, or it's our whole relationship's over, that's for us to really work with when we're at that stage of dealing with our anger. But one of the key turning points is it's got to be, oh, good, I'm aware of my anger, rather than, oh, damn, I'm angry again.
Yes, I was going to circle back to that. I appreciate that you said that, because the clients that come into my office, when I see them get angry, when I start to see it after working with them for so long and seeing no anger, and they finally get angry, there's always a little glimmer in my eye. And a lot of them who know me well enough are like, what? Like, what, you're happy I'm angry? And I'm like, well, I'm not mad about it, and I do feel that way, like, oh, good. So I think it's very, very important to discern and to make clear to the listeners out there that what you're not saying is that anger is bad. It's like, oh, good, anger, transforming anger is not about suppressing anger. It's not about saying go away to the anger. It's about literally transforming it in order to get our needs met. Because if not, then we kind of just become time bombs and erupt over and over again without ever getting our needs met. So I love that part of obviously the whole book is wonderful, but I really resonated with that because I'm an angry person. I'm somebody who's very in touch with my anger, and I'm learning currently the ways to transform it and make it productive.
Yeah. And of course, we're saying don't suppress it and don't dump it. And so most people will go, well, then what am I supposed to do? Feel it fully in a safe setting.
Yep.
With another person, if possible, that is mature enough to help support you, not to justify the anger, but to ask the question, how can you best deal with it?
Yeah.
And when you recognize that anger itself is a need that is not being met, and you need to discover what that need is, and you need to be very curious while you're in that containment period to discover what it is. That's when you said, when a client shows up in your office, you have a glimmer. I have a glimmer too. And when they ask me the question, you look like you're happy I'm angry. And I said, well, I'm happy you're aware you're angry. Yeah. I'm happy that you're angry, not that I want it to stay disabling you. Now that it's come above the surface, you have a chance to discover what you need. And otherwise, it was going to come out sideways. You were not going to want to make love. You're going to forget things that your partner had asked for.
You're going to stay in your addiction. You know what I mean? Now you're fully in touch with your feelings. Now we're going to recover from addiction and depression, or crippling depression and crippling anxiety. It's like, yes, all right, we're moving here.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
I guess one of the last questions I wanted to ask you is, if it weren't for your sudden the 180, right? The curveball that life threw you 30 years into the game,
Right.
do you think this book would have existed?
Not in its current form. I'm a terrible writer by nature. So it took me 45 years to write it. And I had 6 people that didn't help me on the content, but helped me actually have one sentence follow the next ones. So it would have had similar concepts, but they wouldn't have a depth understanding of primal suffering. And it wouldn't have had some of the subtleties, like friendly mind came out of that experience. That was not a concept that I was using. And I didn't also deeply understand, I superficially understood that your response to your feeling was more important than your feeling. But I realized all I had was my response to my feeling. So that gave it a whole bunch more contrast, and being able to have a relationship with clients where I knew no matter what they felt, I did feel for many, many years. And every morning I still have a period when I wake up where I still have the reaction to the transplant medication. I have to take 5 sleeping medications at night. So the book would have maybe happened, but there's zero chance it would have been the same book.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it gives a sense of purpose and meaning to what you endured. Not that obviously, of course, we would prefer if it hadn't happened, but it certainly gives it a sense of purpose, because there's so much to this book that is really helpful for moving away from primal suffering.
Yeah.
That might be the title of this episode. Because I think that that's like just the topic of this conversation, is ways to move away from primal suffering.
And I would tweak that a little, and I would say how to be with primal suffering, because I'd be a little concerned that people would see that maybe as moving away, like withdrawing a little bit from it, whereas it's really being with, because the suffering, for example, during this, especially first 6 years, I was not able to move away from the suffering. The suffering stayed exactly the way it was.
Yeah.
What I did was I didn't compound it by thinking about it, by projecting in the future, and by compounding it. So it's really being with the primal suffering in a different way and responding to it in a different way.
Touche. You know, that you got me there. And that I'm very, very thankful that you pointed that out, because that is one of my weak points in my own recovery from complex PTSD is I want to move away. I want to be done with the suffering. So touche. And thank you for pointing that out, because that's something that is a work in progress for me as well.
Yeah. And again, I just want to really honor your sincerity and your willingness to be in the moment and just to acknowledge whatever's true. Because I think all of us, it's so hard when we feel like, oh, maybe we didn't get something or whatever. And not to hide from it requires such courage. I really support you there. And moving away is what instinctively we all want to do. It's not what we
self-protective.
Yeah. Well, and again, I would tweak the word protective, which is it's delusionally self-protective.
Yes.
It's actually self-harming.
Ends up being self-harming.
Yeah, because moving away leaves us incapable of working with, being with skillfully how we actually still are. And because we think how we feel is how we are, we don't want to see it. But if we realize everyone's human on the planet, and the key is, can we be human and learn a more caring and skillful way to respond to it? And we don't have to stop being human, and we can't stop being human.
Yep. We cannot. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
So you have lots of different websites. So could you talk about some of the websites, because I can't remember which one is which. You have guided meditations, which To the listeners out there, they are phenomenal. I have listened to them. They're really, really great. I call them like active meditations because you're not sitting in silence. It has your mind, you're processing and you're thinking about the things that are being said. So could you just share where people can reach you, can find those things?
Sure. I'll briefly mention about 12 years ago, I have a website called Humanistic Spirituality that has 250 videos. And the videos are all the same theme, which is be aware of your challenging emotions and learn how to respond in a way that's caring from your own question. And 250 different ways. And that's separated into relationships and sexuality and a whole bunch of 8 different categories. The second one is Awareness That Heals, which is the book, Bringing Heart and Wisdom to Life Challenges, but it's awareness-that-heals.org. And the other one is humanisticspirituality.org. And then there's the Global Bridge Foundation, which is theglobalbridge.org. And then finally, there's robertstrock.org, which is pretty much a composite. But any one of them will refer to any of the others. So really all that's necessary is to find any one, and it kind of interlinks.
Okay. And I will link those websites in the show notes for everybody. And then you have 2 podcasts. So do you have the dates for when they're going to launch?
It's going to be in April, but as I'm sure you know better than I, Apple Podcast takes them from a day to 2 weeks to once you submit them, you don't know exactly when they're going to launch. So you can't give an exact launch date. What I do know is we've done about 25 shows, and between the 2 different ones, one being on Awareness That Heals and the other one being, the really pithy issues of homelessness and regenerative agriculture, which probably a lot of people don't know about, and immigration reform. And those 2 will be both launching somewhere in April, but we'll be turning them in 1st of April.
Love it. So happy for you. Can't wait for those podcasts to come out. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I appreciate you reaching out to me. I appreciate all of the hard work that went into this book. And I appreciate all of the self-exploration that you had to do in order to be able to bring us this book that is now allowing so many other people to engage in self-exploration. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And your humility and your courage and sincerity, I appreciate very much you inviting me to be on the show.
Thanks for listening, everyone. For more information about today's episode and to sign up for the Light After Trauma newsletter, head over to my website at alyssascolari.com. The really great thing about being a part of this newsletter is that not only do you get weekly updates on new podcast episodes and blog posts, but you also get access to the private Facebook community, as well as access to all sorts of insider tips, resources, and infographics that supplement what we talk about on the show. You also can connect with me and other trauma warriors. I'm super active on the Facebook community, and I look forward to talking with you.